So we are going to continue looking at the business cycle. So far we looked at how GDP, inflation, and unemployment affect the business cycle or are measured on it and represented here. But now we're going to look at how the business cycle changes according to, remember that we said it's really the government's responsibility to keep things more stable and to try to get it to that equilibrium of full employment and not too much inflation. We don't want hyperinflation. We don't want lots of unemployment. Okay, so we're going to take a look at how that happens today. This is a preview for some of the information that you're going to get soon. Okay, so I'm going to focus in right now on this section at the bottom. I'd like you to get out your gray marker. Follow along with me, please. And we're going to get right in here talking about economic growth. Obviously, we want economic growth. Problem comes when we have too much. So some of the things that give us economic growth. Countries that have land that can be used to produce things are going to have some way of having some economic growth. They also need labor. So you have to have a labor force. And besides that, you generally need to have some capital, something of value. Doesn't have to be money, but it could be. And another piece that really amps up the economic growth is, I'm going to use this word, entrepreneurship. People who are starting new businesses. Entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. That's a very long word. But when people are starting businesses, that's definitely going to help the economy. All of those things I'm going to label are productivity. Productivity is going to give us economic growth. Okay? And when we see economic growth in our piece here, that's going to be up when we're moving up towards a peak. We're going to have some economic growth. Okay. We also have in our economy economic downturns. Some of the things that create an economic downturn are, I'm going to use the word shocks. I know that your teacher has talked about shifts, but I'm going to say a supply shock. Like something kind of shakes things up. And that's going to possibly create a downturn. There could also be, so for example, a supply shock in my mind was during the pandemic. All of a sudden, people couldn't get lumber. And so lumber became very expensive. There was a downturn because of not being able to get the supply that people needed for things, especially for building projects. Demand shocks. There's all of a sudden a huge demand for something that can't be produced, that might also create an economic downturn. And there can just be some natural things, like I mentioned, the pandemic. There could also be other natural disasters that can get in the way of economic growth and actually create problems. Sometimes that's war in a region or flooding, a tornado. Those kinds of things can really obviously shock an area that was once producing things. And I'm going to label these. This is not an economic term, but I just thought these are the kinds of things that interrupt our productivity. And so I'm going to call them interrupters. And that's not like a term you need to know. I just, in my mind, I wanted kind of a term that I could put as my category there that would help me remember. Yes, like so. So one of the things that we're going to find out is that since the government is responsible for our economic growth, not having economic downturns. We're going to have some naturally, but we want to reach that point of equilibrium. There is a particular branch that we're going to look at that actually affects our productivity. Okay, so you'll notice that here, I'm going to zoom out a little bit again. Oop, wrong way. I added the words, if there is too much, because sometimes there is too much economic growth and we don't want to move into hyperinflation. Or if there is too much economic downturn, then we're going to have some problems that can happen, and the government has a response that they need to do. So we're going to look at how can they change the business cycle here. What are the factors that can influence that business cycle, positively or negatively? So our first one is Congress. Please underline the word Congress and say that with me. Congress. Congress. Okay, so Congress, I'm going to draw a picture to remind myself, and please draw your own picture as well, because pictures really do help our brains. I'm going to draw right here the building where Congress meets in Washington, D.C. Got a little statue on top there. Okay, so this is Congress. And I am going to put some people here who are meeting in Congress. These are senators and representatives. Our senators and our representatives are people that we vote for. So I'm going to add that here, vote. And here's my little box and the person's name. This is us voting, okay? I am. Okay. One of my favorite people, and it might help you remember who Congress is. She actually represents New York, is AOC. So if you know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's one of our representatives. And this is how we actually can affect our business cycle too. We affect the economy with the people that we vote into office. There are 100 senators, 2 for each state. This is review from your government class, I know. And 435 representatives. Those are the people who are responsible for making changes to our economy and affecting our business cycle. They make those changes in 2 ways, specifically. Congress is going to affect government spending. That's one of them. And taxes. So there's 2 ways. So we're going to look at that now in our pieces here. So when we're talking about Congress, we are going to be talking about their fiscal policy. Say that with me, please. Fiscal policy. One more time. Fiscal policy. It's very important. These are going to get confusing. One of them is called fiscal policy. The other one's called the monetary policy. And they both have to do with money. Like we're talking about fiscal and monetary. Both of them in my brain make me think of money, but we have to kind of separate them out. Congress is the one who does our fiscal policy. They are the ones who are going to decide what we do with our government spending and what we do with our taxes. So you'll see here that I have made kind of a cause and effect. Whatever Congress decides to do with the fiscal policy is going to have an effect. Okay? But they do need to do something. So let's say, for example, that there is too much economic growth. We're getting into hyperinflation, and that is a dangerous territory. We don't want things to cost too much. Okay? What can Congress do? Government spending. They may have to decrease it. Okay? Might have to make some cuts and decrease government spending. Another thing they can do to kind of slow down that rise in the economy so that it doesn't go too far is that they can increase taxes. When we need to, sometimes we need to. Okay? If Congress decreases government spending and increases our taxes, then there is an effect over here. So I'd like you to underline right here the effects of the fiscal change. That triangle that I put there, I just didn't want to write out the whole word change, but hopefully you've seen that in a math or science class, that the triangle means that there's some kind of change. So the effects of a fiscal change is that hopefully inflation is going to go down. This is going to reduce inflation. And it seems like a bad idea, but sometimes we need it. It's also going to bring down the GDP a little bit. And what that does is, remember our inflationary gap up there? The inflationary gap shrinks. It gets smaller. I'm going to show you that on our chart up above, but I want to give you a chance to write this. So the effects of that fiscal policy, it's going to reduce inflation. That's a good thing sometimes. And it's going to bring our GDP down just a little, because we need that inflationary gap to shrink to get us closer to equilibrium. Okay. So on our chart up here, this gap right here is inflation at the peak, and we've labeled it inflationary gap. If we have less government spending, more taxes, it's going to close that gap to bring it closer to our equilibrium point for our economy. We still want the GDP to be going this direction as a whole, right? Okay. Now, what if there is too much economic downturn? Same thing can happen, right? We can be down here in the trough, and Congress has a responsibility to respond to that and get us closer to equilibrium. So let's look at the fiscal policy down here, please. Okay, fiscal policy. Say that with me again. Fiscal policy. Thank you. Okay, so again, it's the government spending and the taxes. But if we are in a downturn, they're going to do the opposite. Okay, the government is going to, Congress is going to increase government spending. They're going to put more money out into our economy by spending it. They might spend it on people and programs, and that money essentially goes to households, and then people start buying things, and that's how it helps the economy to get better. Okay? And the taxes are going to decrease because we want people to keep their money and spend it. Okay, so decrease in taxes. Okay, and remember again that this is going to move over here and have an effect. So let's look at the effects of the fiscal change that we just made. If Congress increases government spending and decreases our taxes, then hopefully unemployment will go down. So we will reduce unemployment. And our GDP will go up because people are spending and producing. And our recessionary gap is what will close or shrink. Shrink means it's going to get smaller and smaller. Okay. When we look at our business cycle and we see the effects of, let's see, we're down here in our trough and we really want to get to our equilibrium point, then the government can increase their spending, decrease taxes, and people start spending more. People have jobs. We're going to get to full employment and close this recessionary gap that started opening when we started getting more and more unemployment. Okay, so that's how we're going to get out of an economic downturn. We're going to stop here for a 10 to 2. Partner A is going to explain if there's too much economic growth, what can Congress do? And partner B is going to say if there's too much economic downturn, what can Congress do? Okay, so please use this chart to help you. And we'll use the signal word here. Okay. So one thing that I did want to mention about this piece that we're doing here, I wish I had my yellow to kind of tie this all together here. But we are looking at here, if we have too much economic growth, basically what we need to do is we need to go from this peak that we're at and we need to come back to the equilibrium point. There's a word we use for that, and we kind of talked about it as one of the phases of the business cycle. I'm going to write it here. Please write it in black with me. Contraction. So these are the things that we're doing that are going to contract. I don't know why I put a dot over the I. Okay, this is the contraction because we do want to get back to our equilibrium here. So those are the pieces that are happening here when there's too much economic growth. I feel like I should label it somewhere over here too. Maybe I'll put it here, contraction. To help me remember, like this is the stuff that we need to do in order to bring it from a peak that might be getting too high into hyperinflation back to our equilibrium point. Okay? And then the other piece is if there is too much of a downturn and we need to bring it back up to the equilibrium point, that has another name, and you might remember it from the business cycle, and that is called the expansion. I wasn't sure if I was going to write expansionary or expansion, but I'm just going to write expansion. Okay. So we do want to expand and get into this region back again to our equilibrium point. Okay, so our expansion is going to go here from the trough up through our recovery. Okay. And when I'm looking at my policies down below, expansion is going to go along with our economic downturn. So I'm going to add it in over here. These are the things that are going to give us expansion in our economy. Okay. So like I said, it was going to be real quick with that black marker. Our last piece, please take your purple marker and follow with me. Okay. So we have Congress and we have one other tool in our toolbox, and that is the Fed. Say that with me, please. The Fed. The Fed. The Fed is what we say as short, kind of like a little nickname for the Federal Reserve Bank. This is our bank for the whole country. And this adjusts the money supply. That's what they can do. And I'm going to draw my little, this is going to be my eagle, okay, in case you can't tell what my drawing is. I'll get in closer here. Okay, this is the Fed. And they have a seal that looks like an eagle, and it's got some cool lines under it. Thank you. Okay, so this is my seal for the Fed. The difference between, one of the major differences between Congress and the Fed, over here we're voting for people that are going to represent us. The Fed is appointed. Somebody just says, hey, you're a part of this. You do not get to say that. Okay, the Fed is also not as many people. So I'm just going to draw one person here. Where over here I had multiple people to represent my 535 people in Congress. Over here, for the Fed, we're really talking about 7 governors. You might remember this from your government class. Might be a little review. And 12 committee members who are also reporting to the governors. These 12 people oversee the 12 regions in the United States that are broken down as far as money goes. So the Fed can adjust the money supply that's out there. They can do these things over here. So we're going to draw a little arrow here. These are the things that they can do. Remember that Congress, they can change government spending and taxes. Here are the things that the Fed can do. They can set ratios to let us know how much money is out there. They can also set the ratios that tell us how much your, what's it called? APR percentage, you know, that whole piece.
Like the interest rate.
Yes, thank you. The interest rate. They can lend money to banks if the banks need money to go out to people, and they can buy and sell government bonds or government bills that are kind of like this money that's sitting in the government. And when they do that, it changes things in our economy. Like, people are just waiting for the Fed to change the interest rates. I'm always watching, when is the Fed going to change the interest rates? Because I want them to go down so I can refinance my huge house loan. Okay. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Okay. So again, these pieces that the Fed does are also going to have a cause and effect. And it has to do with if there is too much economic growth or if there is too much of an economic downturn. There are things that the Fed can do. Again, they're part of the government, and they have a responsibility to keep our economy on track and keep it getting toward that equilibrium. When we talk about the Fed, we're talking about the monetary policy. Say that with me, please. Monetary policy. Okay, so related to the Fed is the monetary policy. It is the money supply. And they can, if there is too much economic growth, it's similar to our government spending, they are going to decrease the money supply. They're going to bring it down so that we don't have hyperinflation. Okay? When they do that, this is what we're talking about when we say a tight economy. I'm going to add that word tight there. And I'm also going to draw a picture. This is my little money bag, and I'm like tightening it up because I'm going to tie it really tight so that I don't get into it and spend it too much. When they decrease the money supply, that has an effect on the economy. So let's move over here to the effects of the monetary change that we just did here. If the Fed decreases money supply, interest rates are going to rise. Too bad for us if we're trying to buy something big at that time. Might want to wait. It really affects how much money you pay at the end of it all. Okay, and then there are two things that are going to decrease. Investments generally are going to decrease, and demand also decreases. So if they take out the money supply, there's not as much money to invest. There's not as much money to buy things. So demand goes down, investments go down. And the interest rates rise. That kind of correlates with the taxes rising too. It feels not great as a person experiencing this, but sometimes it needs to happen so that we don't go into hyperinflation. Okay? The Fed can also affect our economy if there's too much of an economic downturn. Okay, so they have a monetary policy for that. And it's going to be the opposite of our economic growth. So this part of our monetary policy, if there's too much of an economic downturn, then they know we need to increase the money supply that is in our system. They are going to put money out there into the banks. They're going to sell their bonds so that there's money out there. They're going to change the interest rates and put money into our hands, which is great. It's going to help us to buy things and bring us back to that equilibrium point. They call this a loose economy. And I'm going to have my money bag here open and ready for me to reach in and use that money. Okay. I don't keep my money in a bag, but a long time ago they did. Okay, so that's going to lead again to a change over here. Here's the cause, and here's the effects that we're hoping for. So the effects of that monetary change from the Fed is that interest rates actually fall. They go down, and that's great because now we can buy something and not have to pay back as much money. And these two pieces are the ones that are going to increase, which is great. Investments increase. This is a great time for entrepreneurship because people are going to want to invest in your business, Yair. And the demand for things increases, including services. Okay, so again, we're going to do a 10 to 2 here. I'm going to switch it up this time. Partner A, you have to wait. You're going to talk about when there's too much of a downturn. And partner B is going to start us with what happens if there's too much of an economic growth. What is the Fed going to do to affect that? So we're going to switch those over for our 10 to 2.